Eduardo.
Dr. Warren and the Committee of Correspondence has sent us the warning. The British be here soon.
In this episode of Drive Through History, we are going to learn about Thaddeus Kosciuszko and take a tour of the Benjamin Chew House. Then we visit Valley Forge, the winter encampment that forged, pun intended, the character and discipline that the American Army needed to win. Last, it's on to historic Fort Mifflin, where I get to shoot a cannon and do a little ghost busting.
I love this time of year, fall. The sights, the sounds, the smells, the scares. It's almost Halloween here in Philadelphia. Kind of makes me a little nervous about camping out at Fort Mifflin tonight, supposedly the second most haunted place in America.
Let's start the adventure. Now, at 2/10 of an acre, the home of Thaddeus Kosciuszko is referred to by some as America's smallest national park. This is the home of one of the great heroes of the American Revolution, and probably one you've never heard of. Now, the anglicized version of his name is Thaddeus Kosciuszko. He was born in the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth in 1746. Now, the name of Thaddeus's hometown is unpronounceable by me. Yeah, see, we don't have words like this in Texas, so you figure it out. What a strange and exciting journey it was from that little obscure, unpronounceable European village to becoming a trusted patriot to George Washington and Thomas Jefferson. Now, Thaddeus was educated at a Piarist school. Piarist is a Catholic order. In fact, the word Piarist is kind of a shorthand for the Order of the Poor Clerks Regular of the Mother of God of the Pious Schools.
Yes, nailed it.
After that, it was on to military school, where he studied the history of Poland, world history, philosophy, Latin,
Polish, German, and French languages, law, economics, geography, arithmetic, geometry, and engineering.
Upon graduation, he was promoted to captain. Thaddeus Kosciuszko earned a scholarship to go learn fine arts in France, and it would be the time in France that would radically change the trajectory of his life. The American Revolution had begun, and young Thaddeus was recruited to fight for the American side by none other than Benjamin Franklin. Franklin was there to stir up French support for the effort and new talent when he saw it. He arrived in America just 1 month after the signing of the Declaration of Independence. Initially, he served as a volunteer, but soon he was promoted to become the head engineer for the entire Continental Army. On September 24th, 1776, Kosciuszko's first task in America was to fortify the banks of the Delaware River against a possible British crossing. Later, he commanded the construction of several forts and fortified military camps along the Canadian border. His work made significant contributions to the Battle of Ticonderoga and victory at Saratoga in 1777. After that, George Washington assigned him to oversee the military engineering works at the stronghold in West Point on the Hudson River. Later, he asked to be transferred to the Southern Army, where he also made significant contributions to the American victories. Thaddeus was sent here to Pennsylvania for his work with the Continental Army. Now, shortly after arriving, he read the United States Declaration of Independence, and it is said that he was moved to tears because the document contained everything in which he believed. He was so moved, in fact, that he decided to meet with Thomas Jefferson, the author of the Declaration. The two met in Virginia a few months later at Jefferson's estate, Monticello. After spending the day discussing philosophy and other things they shared in common, they became close friends. Later, Kosciuszko would be a guest at Monticello on many occasions. In recognition of his dedicated and faithful service, Thaddeus Kosciuszko was brevetted by the Continental Congress to the rank of Brigadier General in 1783 and became a naturalized citizen of the United States that same year. George Washington also presented Kosciuszko with 2 pistols and a sword as gifts for his outstanding service to America. Becoming a hero of the American Revolution was just the beginning. Kosciuszko returned to his homeland and became a Polish and Lithuanian national hero, a general, and a leader of the 1794 uprising against the Russian Empire.
Kosciuszko was admired by general and foot soldier alike because of his technical knowledge and his sympathetic understanding and generosity. Thomas Jefferson wrote of Kosciuszko, "He is as pure a son of liberty as I have ever known." Tragically, Kosciuszko, a champion of the poor and oppressed, never witnessed the arrival of freedom in his homeland of Poland.
Kosciuszko was a firm believer in equality and requested before leaving the United States for the second time that the money from his estate be used to buy freedom for slaves, help to educate them, and provide them with enough land to support themselves. Kosciuszko spent the last years of his life in Switzerland, where on October 15, 1817, he died at the age of 72. He is buried in a castle in Krakow, Poland, among the tombs of the Polish kings.
We've had dozens of drive-through history shoots with no rain and great weather. And now that it's raining, I gotta tell you, I'm kind of glad. It replenishes the earth and satisfies the soul.
After the British had taken Philadelphia, they garrisoned the bulk of their army in a little village called Germantown, north of Philadelphia. Washington, in the meanwhile, was watching and waiting for his chance.
On the night of October 3rd, 1777, George Washington and his men left their camp under cover of darkness for the purpose of a surprise attack on Germantown. If they succeeded, then Philadelphia would fall into the hands of the Americans. If they failed, it would remain in the hands of the enemy.
The battle didn't exactly start swimmingly for Washington. See, he had a plan involving 4 columns of troops converging on Germantown. Yet it was too complicated and a whole column got lost in the foggy woods.
The surprise attack was ruined when British sentries spotted and fired upon the Americans. Then the Americans advanced on the British. Then the British fell back and barricaded themselves right here at a house owned by a man named Benjamin Chew. Now we're right here at the Chew House here in Germantown near Philadelphia, where some of the fiercest fighting of the battle took place. The retreating British barricaded themselves in this house in the hopes of taking a stand against the Americans.
Just a week earlier, the British had ambushed and massacred an American scouting unit, taking no prisoners at Paoli, Pennsylvania. The British commanders in the Chew House used this, telling their troops the Americans wanted revenge, urging their men to put up a ferocious fight.
The house proved to be an excellent haven, offering the British a commanding view and line of sight on the Americans, while protecting them with the 2-foot-thick walls. "50 to 70 Americans died storming this house. Most of them didn't even reach the house. They were killed long before they got near it. But those lucky few who did were either instantly shot or bayoneted to death. Now, the inability to take the house disheartened the Americans. This, combined with the general chaos of the battle, caused the Americans to sound a retreat. I'm actually at the window where it is said that an American soldier tried to break in the house, where he was quickly bayoneted and killed in this very spot.
bullets hit the wall right here.
Washington's plan was just too complicated, and it relied too heavily on everything going right. And when Murphy's Law reared its ugly head, well, the battle was lost. The beaten and confused Americans were forced to retreat, suffering a humiliating defeat.
After the Germantown defeat, something odd happened, something that says a lot about the temperament and character of George Washington. It seems that his arch nemesis, British General William Howe, had somehow lost his dog in the battle. An American soldier found it and noticed a very famous person's name on the dog's collar. So he took the dog to General Washington. George Washington loved dogs and decided to immediately return the dog to the man that had just defeated the American army in battle. He wrote a polite note and sent the dog back to his owner under a flag of truce. The note said, "General Washington's compliments to General Howe. Does himself the pleasure to return him a dog," which accidentally fell into his hands, and by the inscription on the collar appears to belong to General Howe. October 6th, 1777.
Yep, still raining, with no end in sight. Not a bad time to fly a kite, eh, Ben?
In the late 1760s, British engineer John Montresor was commissioned to construct a fort at the southern edge of Philadelphia on the Delaware River to protect the city from invasion. Construction ceased in 1774.
I'm right here in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, by the Delaware River, talking about Fort Mifflin. Now, the reason this fort is significant in American history is airplane cut. All right, who built a fort right next to an airport anyway? Now I'm walking along the eastern side of old Fort Mifflin here in Philadelphia, right by the Delaware River, which is over that little hill. Interestingly, it's also right by the Philadelphia International Airport. Now you can see these old granite walls that actually predate the Revolutionary War. In fact, when you look closely, you can even see evidence of the 1777 British bombardment of Fort Mifflin when their cannonballs would smash into these granite walls. Let's go take a closer look at Fort Mifflin. After the adoption of the Declaration of Independence, Benjamin Franklin was named to head the committee that would plan for the defense of Philadelphia. The committee ordered that chevaux de frise, which is French for iron horses, be sunk right in this section of the Delaware River where it narrows between Fort Mifflin on the Pennsylvania side and Fort Mercer over on the New Jersey side. Now, what's an iron horse? Iron horses were constructed by driving 5-foot-long sharpened metal spikes into huge timbers, and those were attached to boxes filled with tons of stones. Now, the Americans knew where these gnarly things were, but the British didn't. The hope was that these obstacles would slow down the approach of oncoming enemy ships. After the defeat of George Washington at the Battle of Brandywine, the British took control of Philadelphia in September of 1777. Now, the British forces were desperate to get much-needed supplies into Philadelphia, but Fort Mifflin, along with Fort Mercer over on the other side, stood in their way. So the British laid siege to Fort Mifflin in early October of 1777. The siege, which lasted until the middle of November, destroyed most of Fort Mifflin.
During the siege, 400 soldiers held off over 2,000 British troops and 250 ships until November 10th, when the British intensified their assault, launching an incessant barrage of cannonballs into the fort. This bombardment, where an estimated 12,000 cannonballs flew in the span of just 3 days, holds the record for the most brutal bombardment in North American history. On November 15, 1777, the American defenders were forced out, their fort destroyed. But their heroic stand had bought George Washington some time, allowing his army to retreat to Valley Forge for the winter.
Amazingly, my great-great-great-great-great uncle was one of the Americans defending Fort Mifflin. In fact, I have a letter that he sent to his wife that we've treasured in my family for generations.
My dearest Petunia, every day the struggle becomes more and more unbearable. My love for you and strong convictions are the only thing that keepeth my sanity. Our fort has been under siege for weeks, the shelling at times unbearable. According to my calculations, a cannonball has hit approximately every 2 seconds for weeks. My love for you is like a flower. Sorry, a cannonball has disrupted my proclamation of love for thee. How have things been going on the Stotts Manor? Were you able to harvest all of our crops before the first frost? These cannonballs sure are inconvenient indeed. Forever yours, Cornelius Stotts. November 10th, the year of our Lord 1777.
Love a good cry. Now, many of the buildings that you can see here today at Fort Mifflin are holdovers from the post-1795 construction. And this Commandant's house right here is significant because it's the only dwelling north of the Mason-Dixon line that was designed by Pierre Charles L'Enfant, the man who designed the layout for Washington, D.C. And if you've ever been to Washington, D.C., you'll know that the layout there is pretty special indeed. It's pretty cool that his building is still around.
Pierre Charles L'Enfant was an American soldier, engineer, and architect. Born in France, he volunteered as a private in the American Revolution. He is known as the architect who created the plan for the new U.S. Capitol that was built after the war. General Washington called it the Federal City. We call it Washington, D.C.
Let's light this candle. We finally made it. Valley Forge, Pennsylvania. What better place for cold and inclement weather? It's the famous site of George Washington's winter camp in the winter of 1777 and 78 during the American Revolutionary War. It is well known as a time of great suffering for George Washington's army, but what is less known is that it was also a time of retraining and rejuvenation. In December of 1777, Washington set up his winter camp here at Valley Forge, about 22 miles northwest of Philadelphia. Now, strategically, it was an excellent choice for a winter camp. In fact, it could have been engineered by a military engineer. One whole side is protected by the river, and there are two shallower creeks that provided a natural barrier against any attacking cavalry or artillery. In fact, any oncoming attackers would have to charge uphill, which would have put them at a tremendous disadvantage. Valley Forge was close enough to Philadelphia to keep an eye on the city and to contain British raiding parties, but far enough away to prevent surprise attacks. Washington arrived Valley Forge with over 12,000 troops. On December 19th, the hungry soldiers marched into the camp. They might have thought the worst was over, but by spring, 1 in 6 were dead.
For months, the soldiers had only tents to separate them from the winter, and it wasn't until February of the next year that the men finished building huts to keep them warmer.
Now, building wooden huts like this became a high priority.
Actually, these are pretty nice. No doubt the people who built these had all the nice tools and all the nice weather, unlike now. Now, most of the 2,000 huts that were built during that long, brutal winter weren't quite this sweet. Now, the original ones were built by order of George Washington himself, who laid out the size and the style. Now, each log hut was to house 12 soldiers. They were to have walls 6.5 feet tall, 14 feet long, and 16 feet wide. And they were each ordered to have a stone fireplace. Now, they were built over a pit that had been dug into the ground 2.5 feet. Generally, there was only a dirt floor and some sort of a cloth covering the door. They were damp, dank, drafty, dark, smoky, and generally unhealthy. In other words, they were one big germ party. Everyone was invited. Which reminds me, it's like Granddad always used to say, you can never have too much hand sanitizing gel. The shelters were laid out in regular patterns to form streets, forming a kind of primitive military village. Clothing and feeding the troops was a daunting challenge. These soldiers struggled to stay warm during the winter, and over 2,000 soldiers died from disease. But even though Washington's men had suffered such a harsh winter and had staggering losses due to disease, the army emerged even stronger than before. This was due in great part to a man named Baron Friedrich von Steuben. The Baron was a skilled Prussian drill master. He had been a general staff member of an elite military unit in Frederick the Great's army. This background and experience would be immeasurably valuable to Washington's troops. The Baron was currently unemployed, and General Washington had an opening. Washington's army lacked precision training, a skill necessary to be successful and effective in 18th century warfare. But the Baron was a tough officer who tirelessly trained and drilled the men. He would often become frustrated and scream at the soldiers in his foreign tongue. When that stopped being entirely effective, he would then have his trusty aide berate the men in English for him. But within weeks, everyone could see a new proficiency and a new pride in Washington's formerly dispirited soldiers. As spring arrived, there were other factors coming together to boost morale and send sagging spirits soaring. Perhaps most importantly, France had entered the war as an ally of the new nation. To celebrate, festivities were held in camp on May 5th. Along with prayer, there were parades and gun salutes. Valley Forge was a hard master, under which the American army suffered greatly. No doubt Washington had a few sleepless nights here at his headquarters at Valley Forge. But we came out better and stronger than when we went in. And in that way, Valley Forge was a blessing in disguise. I mean, these soldiers would have been hungry for meat. Ah! Guess I won't be needing these. Ah! On the trail of adventure. Let's rock. "100% chance of precipitation in our nation. Time for a celebration!" I love it. Here we are. Time to do a little camping at Fort Mifflin. I'm gonna make sure I got a place to sleep tonight with the ghosts. That keeps happening.
Not time for bed yet. Going back into these catacomb-like tunnels and cells they call the casemates. Stories of ghosts that have come through here. A man by the name of Howe who was hanged. Elizabeth Pratt who hanged herself out in the courtyard. All these strange stories. And right here is casemate number 5. Apparently the location where they've had the most strange paranormal activity. This place has been used for dwellings and prisons. Right now it's mainly used for entertainment. Interesting. A guy like me's been through a lot. Nothing much scares me. Least of all this place. Luckily, I brought my LED flashlight with me. Not scared of anything in here. Please. Well, this is it. Casemate number 5. The place that's, quote, most haunted in the second most haunted place in America, here at Fort Mifflin. You know, what I find it most interesting is, excuse me, hello, what? Ah! We're partying up here, we're partying! Maybe Grandma was right. Maybe I won't ever amount to anything after all. I mean, I can't even control the weather. Just kidding. It's just me, you know? Kicking it old school at Valley Forge. We're gonna look at a statue of my big man George Hope. Still partying over here.